Ready to clear out some clutter? Donate your new and gently used items to the Habitat for Humanity Portland Region Restores. Help keep usable items out of our local landfill, plus it's tax deductible. You can donate everything from appliances to furniture, building materials to lighting, paint, housewares, and more. And you can request a donation pickup online or drop off your donation at any of the Restore locations in Beaverton, Gresham, or Portland. Visit pdxrestore.org to learn more. That's pdxrestore.org. We all know first responders are crucial in a life-threatening emergency, but if a major disaster happens, like the Cascadia earthquake, there are over 600,000 people in Portland and only about 700 sworn firefighters. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with Glenn Devitt, Community Resilience Coordinator for the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. He trains and oversees the Neighborhood Emergency Team, or NET. With over 1,000 active volunteers, they're trained in things like fire suppression, basic search and rescue, even emergency radio communications. These are your neighbors who will probably be the first line of support in a major disaster. It's Tuesday, November 12th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. I know you're the official coordinator of the program today, but you used to be a volunteer yourself. Why did you do it?
So I became involved in the program in 2013. I had moved here from New York City. My partner was doing a master's program out here, and we fell in love with Portland and chose Portland. Part of getting out of New York was realizing that the infrastructure there was kind of feeling like it was crumbling, from subway outages to power outages, 9/11. And so we found Portland and we said, yay, this is nirvana, right? Like we all do. And then I moved here and learned about the earthquake and said, really? This is what we're dealing with now? That we escaped. So there are two things you can do. You can either curl up in a little ball and cry about it, or you can become prepared and decide you're going to be able to do something when bad things happen. So that's what we did. I found the NET program. I joined in 2013. I was trained by my now supervisor, Jeremy Van Kuren, and he jokes that my interview process was about 5 years long because 5 years later they opened up. He was able to hire additional positions in the program, so I was lucky enough to join. And I actually, at that point, I had owned my own businesses for close to 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I fell so in love with this volunteer work that I sold everything else, and here I am. This is what I do. So I finally figured out what I want to be when I grow up, and this is it.
Awesome. We've discussed what the Neighborhood Emergency Team program is before on the show, just a handful of times, but to someone who's maybe just hearing about it, could you give a brief explanation of what the program is all about?
Sure. So the Neighborhood Emergency Team program is part of a national curriculum called CERT, C-E-R-T. Mm-hmm. Some folks may have heard of in other jurisdictions. Basically, it's essential training for volunteer first responders so that they can help neighbors in an emergency without getting hurt. And that's really the key.
My partner was part of the Arbor Lodge area team for a handful of years. And I remember she would get occasional texts during ice storms or whatever to have people out and about. It was active is what I'm saying. It seems like it isn't just the big one or whatever. It's literally any emergency. I'm curious what types of things these NET volunteers get trained in preparation for a major disaster. Are they learning how to drive on ice? What is going on?
Driving on ice is not part of the program because we don't want them wrecking their cars.
What about donuts? Are they learning how to...
It's reserved for professionals, Claudia.
Okay.
So we often talk about the earthquake as our gold standard of training because it's the worst natural disaster that happens here. Mm-hmm. But as you can imagine, we've deployed nets for dozens of incidents over the past year, but none of those have been earthquakes. So you're correct. We do other things. In large part, we're finding that nets are becoming climate emergency responders, as we all are. Heat domes, that sort of thing. So last winter, you might remember the January ice storm when we had, 6 days when the city shut down. So folks did everything from shelter response, meaning working at emergency warming shelters to help the public, checking on their neighbors. This was huge. Just knowing who's around you on your block and who needs assistance. We had nets one in particular who was at the end of a cul-de-sac for 6 days with no medical response, no nothing. A neighbor broke a hip, another one fell in the ice, and they knew what to do because they had this training. They've also done things like when a power line is down, the fire department will call and say, can you send nets to watch this so that we can go do other more high acuity calls? So
Mhm.
nets will relieve professionals so that they can go do what they're trained for.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
similar things during heat as well. They will distribute water, work at misting stations, work at shelters, wherever we need them to go.
Yeah. My girlfriend, she told me that the final test was at a training site. She explained it was like a really tall building or whatever. And then there were trained and hired actors where, like, on your feet, you had to learn how to triage and know when to get the hell out of the building before it blew. And it just sounded like a blockbuster movie. I was like, what is going on?
It does look like that,
People were
yeah.
like, head wound, head wound. She was just trying to explain to me. And it sounded so cool, but also like incredibly panic inducing. Is that still part of the training, that final test?
Absolutely. Every net after their classroom training goes through
Nice.
that session. It's called our final field exercise.
Mhm.
And it is designed, as you said, to kind of induce a little bit of that stress because we want people to experience that in training, not when they need, to respond. So yeah, that includes triage, which is what you're describing, sorting injured patients who are dressed up in fake blood and all that kind of stuff, search and rescue, cribbing, and fire extinguisher. So we do actually use the actual Portland Fire and Rescue Training Center, same place where firefighters train because
Mhm.
that's our volunteers trained to that level of standard. I think some folks think of these kinds of programs as people who want to be firefighters, and that is not the case. These are folks trained to a certain level of capacity using the same equipment and techniques that the professionals do.
It's pretty cool. My partner is now a medical provider, so I think she really enjoyed that field exercise.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. When we work with teenagers in particular, I know a few have gone into medical professions as a result of that experience, so it's pretty great.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, how 50 or so ham radio operators are ready to become an emergency communication node. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a global streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. Stream beautiful, hand-picked films anytime, anywhere. Starting today, you can catch the streaming premiere of The Substance. Demi Moore delivers a career-best performance as an A-lister past her prime, lured by a mysterious drug that transforms her into a gorgeous 20-something played by Margaret Qualley. The catch? She must split her time evenly between both bodies. What could possibly go wrong? It's a deliriously entertaining and spine-tingling masterpiece, and you can start streaming The Substance and more for 30 days free at mubi.com/citycast. That's mubi.com/citycast.
The new Apple Watch Series 10 is here. It has the biggest display ever. It's also the thinnest Apple Watch ever, making it even more comfortable on your wrist. And it's the fastest charging Apple Watch, getting you 8 hours of charge in just 15 minutes. Introducing the all-new Apple Watch Series 10, now available for the first time in glossy jet black aluminum. Compared to previous generation, iPhone XS or later required. Charge time and actual results will vary.
Well, aside from NET, you also oversee the basic earthquake emergency communication node volunteers, or Beacon, which is clever because it's a bunch of ham radio operators. Like, could you explain what they do? Do you give out the ham radios? Do we have to buy the ham radios? Like, what's going on?
Sure. So it is a city-run program, and the city buys the equipment. So these are 50 locations around the city. And if you go to portland.gov/beacon, BEECN, that site lists all the locations the public should be aware of. So the idea behind this is that when all other communications fail, cell phones, satellite, internet, this is where people can go and the city will be able to transmit information there via radio to inform the public what's happening. And so volunteers who can train, and it's a 90-minute virtual session. I think the next one is November 18th. I'll be doing that. So people can train online, and then we teach them how to become the person who runs that site. These are all volunteer-run operations. We could not possibly staff 50 of them.
Right.
And then, yes, those sites link up to via radio connections to the fire stations, and then the fire stations hook up to us at the Central Emergency Operations Center via ham radio. So people do not have to be ham licensed to be a volunteer at their Beacon. Anyone can do it.
If somebody wanted to see where, like, their Beacon outposts were, like, where could they go to check that out?
So on the city website, portland.gov.gov/beacon, BEECN, There's a map there, and you can type in your address and look it up. You can also go to portlandmaps.com and look under the public safety information there.
Well, I was wondering if you could walk me through what the NET volunteers are trained to do. Like, let's say the big one hits. How are they trained to respond?
Right. So the first thing you do is make sure their family's okay and themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So you take care of your own first. That's always the priority. And then within about 24 hours, we expect folks to start gathering as their local team. So the things we train them in include fire suppression, meaning using a fire extinguisher on a small fire, utility shutoff, so gas and electric and water if necessary, basic first aid, light search and rescue, meaning if a building is damaged, you can assess whether it's safe to enter or extract people, radio communications, which also ties into Beacon. An important one, too, is disaster psychology, which sometimes folks don't think about, what are often called soft skills, the ability to, A, take care of yourself mentally and also take care of the folks around you in a crisis. So all these skills are available in basic training.
Well, since it seems like most of the initial response in a large citywide emergency will be neighborhood and volunteer-based, what are some basic emergency preparedness measures that you recommend people do today to help out?
You are absolutely correct. I won't bore you with statistics, but on average, you figure in the city at any given time, there's approximately one firefighter on duty for about 3,700 residents. So in a crisis, we need each other. Professionals are not coming. So things that everyone can do are very simple, and we have some guidelines that are designed to be relatively inexpensive, or as inexpensive as possible, because everyone needs to be able to do this. So store water is my first one. Water is the most important thing, clean drinking water, because after about 3 days without good water, your body starts to fail. I would encourage folks also in preparedness we offer presentations about an hour and a quarter, 75 minutes. Our volunteers will come to community groups and present to them about just anything you can do to prepare. We have some documentation about that and some notes about things to purchase, but it's not about the purchasing. It's more about the planning, knowing who to contact, having an out-of-state contact that you can reach in a crisis who's not affected in the emergency zone, knowing how to get a hold of your family, knowing where you're going to gather, having that water prepared, knowing how to create a shelter if you need it, knowing about sanitation when plumbing is not working. So we cover all this introductory material in about an hour and a quarter. And I'll certainly give you a link to do that. It's on our website. It's portland.gov/net, N-E-T. And in the right column there's a link to request a presentation. On a mobile device, I think it's at the bottom of the page.
One thing I did learn was not to have anything in your basement, because I had a bunch of stuff in the basement and they're like, well, it's an earthquake. What happens if your house collapses? And I was like, oh, yeah.
It depends on the house. I mean, some you can retrofit. It's really situational. There's a terrible phrase we use in the industry. It depends. So it depends on whether the house will be okay or not. But garages and outbuildings are great places to store stuff because even if they collapse, they're easier to dig through than, an entire house.
Right. You threw out a couple of websites, but if somebody wanted to immediately join NET and get to experience the thrill of that field exercise themselves, how would they get involved?
Right. So they will go to portland.gov/net. And there's a 3-step process there, pretty clear. So first thing to do is register and apply. And then we'll start sending information to folks when the next basic NET training is available. I'm running one right now. It's full with 80 people. And the next one will probably be next year. I do not have dates yet.
Will you contact our office when NET provides ice driving, stunt driving in particular? Because I think we'll need it in the earthquake. If you think about it, there's going to be a lot of, collapsed buildings, just a lot of debris. We're going to probably need ramps, is what I'm thinking.
This is why we have cargo bikes. Much more mobile in an earthquake.
Yes, that sounds nice. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time and walking through the program. It's one of my favorite things about Portland is that we have this volunteer program. I love hearing about it. People should get involved. It makes you love your neighborhood even more because you realize everyone's taking care of each other.
Agreed, Claudia. The spirit amongst the volunteers is really amazing. It's what gets me through the rest of my job is the time I get to spend with the volunteers because they're just all great people doing amazing things for each other. So I encourage your audience to think about it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend, rate or leave us a review. It really does help us out. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.